The morgue was colder than I expected. The sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and unforgiving. My son stood stiff beside me, his wife clutching his arm as though she were the grieving widow, not I. When the attendant pulled back the sheet, my knees nearly buckled. There he was, my husband, pale and still, the warmth of our life together extinguished. For a moment, the world narrowed to the outline of his face, the silence in his chest. 38 years of marriage, gone in an instant. I reached for his hand, cold beneath my trembling fingers, when I heard it. A whisper, low but clear, carried between my son and his wife. "Now the house and 27 million are ours," she breathed, her lips barely moving. My son didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes told me enough. Grief and fury crashed through me, two tides colliding. The woman who had married into our family, who smiled politely at our table, was celebrating my husband's death before the body was even buried. And my son, let her. I said nothing. Not then. Not in that sterile room where my husband's body lay, demanding dignity, not scandal. I swallowed the scream that clawed at my throat. I signed the papers. I stood upright, though my heart felt as though it had splintered. On the drive home, their voices filled the car in hushed tones, thinking me deaf in my silence. Plans for the house, discussions of smart investments, laughter barely restrained. They thought the future was theirs already. I sat in the back seat, staring at the rain streaking down the window. My silence wasn't weakness, it was a mask. That evening, after the condolences, after the ritual of tea and handshakes and whispered sympathies, I slipped away to the study. My husband's chair still smelled faintly of his cologne. His glasses rested on the desk where he had left them, as though he might return at any moment to read the paper. My phone buzzed, a single message from my lawyer. "I'm here if you need me." I typed back only one line. "Come tonight." When he arrived, I finally let the tears fall, heavy and hot. He poured me a glass of water, waited, then said the words that steadied me like steel. "Don't worry," he told me, his voice calm, deliberate. They started celebrating too soon. I lifted my head, my breath catching. For the first time that day, a spark of something other than grief flickered in my chest. Hope. They thought I was broken. They thought I would yield. But they didn't know the truth. The game had only just begun. The house had never felt so large, so empty. Every corner carried my husband's presence. The books stacked neatly by his armchair, the half-finished crossword on the kitchen table, the faint smell of cedar from his study. I longed for silence, for a moment to grieve in peace. But peace was not what awaited me. The moment we stepped through the door, my daughter-in-law kicked off her heels and looked around with proprietary satisfaction. She let out a long, deliberate sigh, her eyes sweeping over the staircase, the high windows, the polished floors. "It will need some updating," she said lightly, running her hand along the banister. "But the bones are good. We can work with this." Her words struck me harder than the cold air in the morgue. Work with this, as if it were already hers. My son didn't flinch. He followed her into the living room, loosening his tie, his eyes avoiding mine. I could see it in the way he sank into his father's chair, not as a visitor, but as an heir staking a claim. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my bag so tightly my knuckles whitened. I wanted to scream, to hurl them both out of the house. But I swallowed it down. My silence was a weapon now, one they mistook for weakness. They poured themselves drinks, laughing softly, as if this were a celebration rather than the first night without my husband. I could still feel his absence like a hole in my chest, but their voices grated against it, a cruel reminder that grief was mine alone. From the kitchen, I heard her voice again, sharp and calculating. "We should start calling contractors tomorrow. The sooner we renovate, the sooner we can put it on the market." I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. On the market. They weren't even waiting for the funeral. My son's voice was quieter, almost hesitant. Maybe we should give it some time. But she cut him off with a laugh. Why wait? It's ours now. Better to act fast. Her certainty was a knife. I pressed my hand to the table, grounding myself, forcing my face into calm when I walked back into the room. Would you like some tea? I asked softly. They blinked at me, surprised. They were expecting tears, rage, collapse, not composure. Yes, thank you, my son said, though his eyes darted away, uneasy. As I brewed the tea, my husband's last words to me echoed in memory. Words spoken weeks before his death, words I had brushed aside at the time. Not everything is as it seems. Be ready. And now, standing in my kitchen, pouring tea for a son who had already buried me in his plans, I finally understood. I was ready. The following days blurred into one long ritual of condolences. Neighbors arrived with flowers, casseroles, murmured prayers. I moved through it all like a shadow, my grief raw, my chest hollow. But in my own house, the performance was different. My son and his wife stayed close, too close. She hovered in the kitchen, offering to help with the accounts. He followed me down hallways with questions about papers father might have left lying around. To anyone else, it looked like care. To me, it was a siege disguised as sympathy. One afternoon, I found her in my husband's study, rifling through drawers she had no right to touch. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, her smile too quick, too wide. "Oh, Mother, I was just trying to organize things for you. You shouldn't have to deal with all this in your state." I glanced at the half-open drawer where she had been digging. It held our financial ledgers. She hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. "Leave it," I said, my tone flat. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Of course. Just trying to help." She brushed past me, her perfume sharp in the air, her eyes glinting with something far colder than compassion. That evening, my son came into the sitting room, sitting across from me like a man rehearsing lines. "Mother," he began softly, "you shouldn't carry all this weight alone. We want to take care of you. Let us handle the estate, the house, the accounts. You can just rest. Such a gentle word, but heavy with insult. Rest, while they carved up the life my husband and I had built. Rest, while they picked at the bones before they were buried. I kept my face neutral, nodding as though soothed. Inside, my fury simmered. Later that night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. "She's slower than I thought," my daughter-in-law muttered. "She hasn't even asked about the will." "Give it time," my son replied. "We'll make sure it's all in our name soon enough." I pressed my back against the wall, every syllable searing into me. They thought I was blind, deaf, weak. But silence has a way of sharpening the ears, of catching truths people think are safe in whispers. When I finally lay in bed, my husband's side empty and cold, I whispered into the dark, "I hear you. I see you. And I will remember every word." The mask of their care was slipping, and when it fell, it would shatter. The funeral had not yet come, and already they circled like vultures. The house, draped in silence and flowers, should have been a place of mourning. Instead, it became their stage. I was in the parlor, arranging sympathy cards, when I heard voices from the dining room. Their tones were hushed but urgent, as though the walls themselves might betray them. "If we put it on the market quickly," my daughter-in-law was saying, "we'll get top dollar before the spring rush." My blood chilled. My son's reply was cautious, but not horrified. "It's too soon." "People will talk, let them talk," she snapped. "Talk doesn't pay mortgages. This place is too big, too old. We'll never use it. Once it's sold, we can buy something modern, something ours." The word ours scraped against me like broken glass. This house, the one my husband had built board by board, where every photograph on the wall told a story, where our children had taken their first steps, had already been stripped of meaning in her eyes. I stepped quietly into the doorway. They froze, guilt flashing across their faces before settling into feigned innocence. "What's this about selling the house?" I asked, my voice steady. My son cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "We were just discussing options, Mother. Of course, nothing without your approval." But she, bolder, lifted her chin. "It's only practical. The upkeep alone is ridiculous. Surely you don't want to spend the rest of your years worrying about repairs." Her words dripped with sweetness, but her eyes gleamed with triumph, as if she had already signed the papers. I forced a faint smile, though my insides burned. "You're right," I said softly. "The house is old. It does take work." Relief flickered across her face, and she launched into details. Agents she knew, buyers she could call. My son shifted uneasily, but he didn't stop her. I let her speak, every word carving deeper into my resolve. They thought they had delivered the first blow, that I was conceding ground. But what they didn't know was that the battlefield was already shifting beneath their feet. That evening, as they retired upstairs, whispering and laughing like thieves, I sat alone in my husband's study. His glasses still lay on the desk, his last crossword half finished. My fingers traced the indentation of his pen against paper, and I felt his presence steady me. "They began celebrating too early," my lawyer had told me. And now, with their greed echoing in my ears, I knew he was right. They thought they had struck first. But it was only the opening move. The war was mine to finish. Grief is a strange companion. It should have hollowed me, left me motionless, but instead it sharpened into something else. Focus. My husband's absence was a wound, yes, but it also lit a fire. I would not let his memory be devoured by their greed. I moved through the house in silence, watching. They mistook my quiet for surrender. My daughter-in-law strutted through the halls with her phone pressed to her ear, whispering to realtors. My son wandered the study, testing the feel of the leather chair that had been his father's throne. To them, I was invisible. Good. Let them believe it. That evening, when the house finally stilled, I slipped into the study and dialed my lawyer. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm, measured. "I warned you," he said softly. "They think the game is already won." I swallowed hard. "Tell me we're not defenseless." A pause, then, "Not even close. Your husband was a clever man. He didn't leave this world unprepared." I closed my eyes, tears stinging. Of course he hadn't. He had known them, seen their hunger, long before I had admitted it. "Come tomorrow," my lawyer continued. "Bring nothing with you. We'll start quietly. No one must know." When I hung up, my pulse raced with a new energy. For the first time since his death, I felt less like a widow and more like a soldier sharpening her blade. The next morning, I put on my black dress, wrapped a shawl over my shoulders, and told my son I was visiting a friend for comfort. He barely looked up from his phone, only muttering, "Take your time, Mother." I drove across town to my lawyer's office, the city humming with ordinary life while mine pulsed with secrets. He greeted me with a firm handshake, then slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, sealed, notarized, dated just weeks before my husband's death. A second will. My breath caught. "They don't know this exists," he said, "and we won't reveal it until the right moment. Let them dig their own graves first." I ran my fingers over the paper, my husband's signature bold and certain. The weight of his foresight steadied me. "They'll come for you hard," the lawyer warned. "They'll accuse, pressure, manipulate. But remember, silence is your ally. Let them think you are broken. And when the time comes, we strike." As I left his office, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. My husband was gone, but his hand still guided mine. And my silence, the very thing they mocked, would become the blade that cut them down. It was the third morning after my visit to the lawyer when I heard unfamiliar voices echoing through the hallway. At first, I thought mourners had come unannounced, another wave of condolences. But the tone was wrong. Too cheerful, too transactional. When I entered the living room, my daughter-in-law stood there, smiling brightly at two strangers in tailored suits. They were walking slowly through the space, clipboards in hand, their eyes sweeping across the crown molding, the fireplace, the antique rug beneath their feet. "Perfect bones," one of them said. "This will show beautifully on the market." Market. The word punched through me. I stopped at the doorway, my voice cutting the air. "What is happening here?" She turned with a start, though the guilt lasted only a heartbeat before her mask returned. "Mother," she said sweetly, "this is just a preliminary showing." "Nothing to worry about." "Showing?" My pulse thundered in my ears. "You brought realtors into this house?" The male agent smiled awkwardly. "We were told you were eager to sell, ma'am." "Of course, if this is a bad time." "It is," I snapped. "Leave." They hesitated, glancing at her. She gave a tight smile. "I'll call you later," she whispered, ushering them out with a confidence that chilled me. She wasn't embarrassed. She was only inconvenienced. When the door shut, silence filled the room, heavy and hot. "You dare parade strangers through this house," I said, my voice trembling with fury, "before your father-in-law is even buried." She folded her arms, her smile gone now. Practicality doesn't wait for funerals. You can grieve all you like, but life moves on. And this house, this museum, is dead weight. It's time it served a real purpose. Her words struck like whips, each syllable sharper than the last. "Does my son know about this?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. Her smirk confirmed it. "He trusts me. He knows I make decisions for our future. You should try it sometime." For a moment, I wanted to scream, to claw at her arrogance until she bled humility. But instead, I drew a breath and forced my voice into calm. "Enjoy your illusions," I whispered. "They won't last." Her brow furrowed, but I turned and walked away before she could reply. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs, but my resolve was steel. She thought she had scored another victory. But each move she made, every greedy step, only dug her deeper into the grave she didn't yet see. In my husband's study, I laid a hand on his glasses, still resting where he left them. "They think they've already won," I murmured. "But you and I know better." The war was no longer silent. It had begun in earnest. That evening, after the realtors had gone and the house was once again wrapped in uneasy quiet, I drove to my lawyer's office. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside I felt the storm building. The image of those strangers strolling through my living room was carved into me like a scar. He was waiting, as always, with papers neatly stacked on his desk. The man had the calm of someone who dealt daily with greed, betrayal, and family wars. But tonight, his eyes held something sharper. "They've moved faster than I expected," he said without preamble. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is this." He slid a thick envelope across the table. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was the second will. I scanned the first page, my husband's name and signature burning into my vision. My throat tightened as I read the clauses, each one striking like a bell. The house, the accounts, the investments. Everything was left to me. Not to my son, not to his wife. To me alone. But there was more, a condition written in his firm, familiar hand. "If my wife predeceases me or is unable to inherit, all assets shall pass directly to our grandchildren, not to our children." I gasped. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My husband had known. He had seen the hunger in our son and his wife and carved them out of his legacy with surgical precision. "They have no idea this exists," the lawyer said, his tone calm but edged with satisfaction. The copy they will try to present, the old will, leaves them the house and the money. They'll cling to it. But once this second will is revealed in court, everything changes. I pressed the paper to my chest, grief and relief colliding. He protected me, I whispered. Even after death, he protected me. Yes, the lawyer said gently. But you must stay silent until the reading. Let them show their greed. Let them believe they've won. The more brazen they are, the harder their fall. I closed the envelope and slipped it back into my bag, my heart pounding with new strength. When I returned home, the dining room lights glowed. My daughter-in-law was pouring wine, my son already raising a glass. To new beginnings, she said brightly, clinking glasses with him. They looked up at me, expecting anger, expecting protest. I only smiled faintly and took a seat. Yes, I said softly, my voice even. To new beginnings. But in my mind, I wasn't toasting them. I was toasting the silence that would bury them. The morning after their little toast, I found my son waiting for me in the kitchen. He had already poured coffee, his tie neat, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes betrayed the urgency underneath. "Mother," he began, sliding a folder across the table, "we need to get ahead of things. There's paperwork that must be signed before probate. It's just a formality. A formality." The word dripped with practiced ease, but I saw the tightness in his jaw. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents authorizing him to act as executor, granting him access to accounts and property, power of attorney disguised as help. If I signed, I would hand him the keys to everything. "Why not let the lawyers handle this?" I asked, my tone deceptively mild. He shifted. "Because lawyers drag things out. They take fees. It's better if I manage it. For the family, for the family." How easily he spoke those words, as if family were a shield for his greed. Before I could answer, his wife entered, silk robe swishing, her smirk already in place. "You're lucky to have a son who's willing to shoulder all this. At your age, these details must be exhausting." Her dagger was thin but sharp. My age, my exhaustion. I closed the folder, sliding it back across the table. "Thank you, but I'll manage." My son's smile thinned. "Mother," he said quietly, "don't make this harder than it has to be." The air between us tightened. For a moment, I saw not the boy I had raised, but a stranger with my husband's eyes, colder, sharper. "Harder for whom?" I asked softly. He stood, pushing back his chair. "For all of us. The longer you hold on to this, the more complicated things become. We're trying to protect you." His wife laid a hand on his arm, her gaze fixed on me. "She doesn't see it yet. But she will." They left together, murmuring as though I were already irrelevant. I sat alone, the untouched coffee cooling before me. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with fury, with resolve. They were no longer pretending. The masks of care had dropped. Now came the pressure, the manipulation, the slow tightening of their grip. But I held the real weapon, locked safely in my lawyer's office. And every demand they made, every document they pushed in front of me, only added fuel to the fire of their downfall. When the moment came, their signatures, their whispers, their toasts, all of it would be laid bare. And I would be the one holding the match. It happened almost by accident. A misplaced envelope on the hallway console, her name printed across it in bold official type. I wasn't snooping. I only picked it up to move it out of sight before guests arrived. But when the flap tore open, a stack of notices slipped out, and the truth spilled into my hands. Overdue statements, final warnings, credit card balances that look like phone numbers, collection letters from banks, tens of thousands owed. My daughter-in-law's perfect composure, her smug confidence, suddenly cracked in my mind. All her insistence on selling the house, all her urgency to liquidate assets quickly. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. That evening, I watched her closely as she poured wine for my son. She laughed too brightly, her hand trembling slightly as she set the glass down. When her phone buzzed, she excused herself with a tight smile, slipping into the hallway. I followed silently, stopping just before the corner. "I told you, I'll have the money soon," she hissed into the phone. "The house will sell, and once it does, you'll get every cent. Just give me time." A pause, then her voice grew sharper. "Don't threaten me. I said I'll pay. I have access to millions now. You think I'm going to walk away from that?" The silence that followed was thick with menace, even from the other end of the line. When she hung up, she leaned against the wall, her face pale, her mask slipping. I stepped into view. "Trouble paying the bills?" She flinched, eyes widening, then narrowed quickly into a glare. "Mind your own business." I held her gaze, calm, unblinking. "That's why you're so eager to sell. It's not about the house. It's about your debts." Her lips curved into a brittle smile. "Believe what you like. Soon, it won't matter. Once the inheritance is settled, no one will remember these little details." She brushed past me, but not before I saw the flash of fear beneath her bravado. Later, alone in the study, I laid the overdue letters on the desk beside my husband's old glasses. My heart pounded, but with grim satisfaction. Their greed wasn't united. It was fractured. My son believed in security, legacy. She was drowning in debt and saw his father's death as her lifeline. Two motives, pulling in different directions. A fault line waiting to split open. I whispered to the silence, "She'll drag him down with her. And when she does, I'll be ready." The house was still mine. The money was still untouched. And now, I had their weakness in my hands. The cracks were spreading. All I had to do was wait for the collapse. The tension broke 2 nights later. The house felt like a stage set for confrontation. Shadows deep in the corners, the grandfather clock ticking loud as a drumbeat. My son came into the sitting room, shoulders stiff, his face pale from sleepless nights. He didn't sit. He stood over me, papers clenched in his hand. "Mother," he said, his voice rough, "this has to stop." I set down my book, meeting his gaze. "What has to stop?" "This resistance. The delays. The lawyers. You're making everything harder. Don't you understand? We need that money. We need the house sold." Now I studied him quietly. "Do you need it? Or does she?" His jaw tightened, the vein in his temple pulsing. "She's my wife. Her problems are mine. We're in this together." "So it's true," I said softly. "Her debts. Her creditors." He froze, the truth naked in his silence. Then anger rushed in to fill the void. "You went through her things. You had no right." I stood slowly, my grief rising with my fury. "And she had no right to treat your father's death as a payday. To march strangers through this house before his body was even laid to rest. To whisper over his corpse about what was ours." His face twisted, torn between shame and defiance. "You don't understand. We're drowning. The debts, they'll ruin us. This inheritance is the only chance we have at last." The truth cracked through his armor. My son wasn't only greedy, he was desperate, shackled to a woman who had dragged him into her ruin. "Then let her drown," I said coldly. "Don't sell your soul to save hers." For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, eyes wide, uncertain, searching for guidance. But then her voice sliced through the air. "Don't listen to her!" My daughter-in-law snapped from the doorway, arms folded, venom in her gaze. "She's manipulating you. She wants to keep everything for herself." My son turned toward her, torn, his anger flickering between us like a flame without direction. "This house, that money," she continued, stepping closer, "it belongs to us now. If she won't hand it over, we'll take it another way." The threat hung heavy in the room. I straightened, my voice steady as steel. "Try." But remember, your father was never a fool. He left more behind than you realize." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing, but she said nothing more. She tugged at my son's arm until he followed her out, leaving me alone in the dim light. The boiling point had been reached. They were no longer hiding their intentions, no longer playing polite. And I was no longer hiding my resolve. The night after their threats, I knew the time for silence was ending. Mourning had given way to battle. They thought me alone, a widow too frail to resist. But I had more than grief. I had foresight, my husband's and my own. The next morning I drove to my lawyer's office again. The envelope containing the second will was already secured in his vault, but that was only the beginning. "We'll need more than a will," he said, folding his hands. "We'll need witnesses. Proof of their behavior, a pattern of greed. If this goes to court, the story matters as much as the paper." I nodded, though my heart tightened. It meant exposing my own son. But he had made his choice long before. We started with the house staff, the gardener, who overheard my daughter-in-law bragging about their millions, the housekeeper who saw realtors walking through the rooms while I sat in mourning. Each agreed to testify. Their words would paint the picture my son and his wife tried to hide. Next came the bank. My husband had left a trail, meticulous as ever. Joint accounts, investments, letters to his attorney, all pointing to his intent. I sat with the manager, reviewing records, my hands steady as I signed the request to preserve every document. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. Their haste, their arrogance, had left cracks everywhere, and I was gathering the shards to cut them with. At home, I played the grieving widow still, quiet, compliant. I let them believe I was faltering. They pressed harder, growing bolder. My daughter-in-law waved contracts in front of me, trying to trick me into signing. My son avoided my eyes now, his voice rough, as though some part of him still felt the weight of shame. But I held my silence. Every word they spoke, every attempt to corner me, I recorded in my mind. My lawyer called it laying the rope. Let them pull it tighter. One night I stood in my husband's study, staring at his glasses, his last crossword half finished. The lamp cast a golden circle on the desk, and in it lay the papers I had gathered. Witness statements, bank records, the sealed will. "Soon," I whispered, as though he could still hear me. "Soon they'll learn." The war was no longer looming. It was here, waiting in the shadows. And I was ready to walk into it armed with truth, while they stumbled blind with greed. The day of the will reading arrived gray and heavy, the sky pressed low over the city. It should have been a solemn occasion, a final act of respect for my husband. But to my son and his wife, it was the coronation they had been waiting for. They walked into the lawyer's office arm in arm, dressed not in black, but in tailored gray and cream, as though stepping into the life they believed already belonged to them. My son's eyes avoided mine, but my daughter-in-law's smirk was bold, triumphant. The lawyer, calm as ever, gestured for us to sit. Papers rustled. The air thickened. "According to the most recent will filed," he began, "your late father's estate is to be divided as follows." My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her hand tightening on my son's arm. She expected it. The house, the millions, all sliding neatly into their grasp. But the lawyer's next words dropped like stones. "All properties, financial accounts, and assets are left solely to his wife. In the event she cannot inherit, they pass directly to the grandchildren, not the children." The silence that followed was deafening. My son's head jerked up, confusion and disbelief etched across his face. My daughter-in-law's smirk shattered, her mouth falling open in shock. "That's impossible," she spat. "The old will was revoked," the lawyer interrupted smoothly, producing the sealed envelope. "This is the final, notarized document, executed 3 weeks before his passing. It supersedes all previous versions." My son's face flushed crimson. "You knew," he whispered to me, voice trembling with rage. All this time, you knew. I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. Yes, I said softly. His wife shot to her feet. This is fraud. She manipulated him, forced him to cut us out. The lawyer's calm gaze didn't falter. The signatures, the witnesses, the recordings, all are legally binding. If you challenge it, you will lose. The air trembled with her fury. She turned on my son, her voice rising. Do something! Stop this! But he only sat there, staring at the papers, his hands trembling. The fight drained from him, leaving only shame. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. Your father saw the truth in both of you long before I did. He made his choice. As I left the room, I felt their eyes burning into my back, one with rage, the other with hollow defeat. They had toasted too early, celebrated on a corpse. Now they were left with nothing but their greed, laid bare for all to see. The days after the will reading were strangely quiet. The house, once filled with their footsteps and whispers, now belonged to silence again. For the first time since my husband's death, I could walk its halls without feeling their shadows pressing in. My son avoided me. He packed in silence, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red. He never asked forgiveness, and I never offered it. Perhaps he didn't know how, or perhaps guilt had swallowed him whole. When he left, he carried only a suitcase. His wife trailed behind him, her heels clicking angrily against the floor, muttering about lawyers and appeals. But even she knew it was over. The papers were ironclad, and their debts loomed larger than ever. The very night they moved out, creditors came calling. I heard whispers later. Frozen accounts, repossessed cars, lawsuits stacking higher than their pride. The fortune they had tried to steal slipped through their fingers like sand. My daughter-in-law, once so polished, was soon spotted shouting at collectors in public, her mask in ruins. My son, pale and defeated, followed her like a man chained to a storm he couldn't control. And me? I remained. The house was mine, not as a trophy, but as a home. Every room still carried my husband's touch, and though grief still lingered, it no longer drowned me. I placed fresh flowers on his desk, polished his glasses, and finished the crossword he had left incomplete. It felt like speaking to him, like telling him, "We won. They didn't take what you built." One evening my lawyer came with final documents confirming the estate's transfer. He looked at me across the table, his expression kind. "You held your silence longer than most could have," he said. "It saved everything." I thought back to that day in the morgue, when my daughter-in-law had whispered, "Now the house and 27 million are ours." I had wanted to scream then, to expose them in their cruelty. But silence had been my shield, and patience my weapon. Now, standing at the window of my husband's study, I looked out at the garden blooming in early spring. Life was beginning again. Not the same life, no, never the same. But one that was mine, shaped not by their greed, but by my strength and his foresight. They had celebrated too early. They had thought death was the end of the story, but death had only revealed the truth of loyalty, of betrayal, of legacy. And in the end, the house and the 27 million were not theirs. They were mine.